Welcome, Googlers. I've got a really cool speaker for you today. So she's done some amazing volunteer and work with NGOs as a professional now in Rwanda and Ghana, and she's going to share the stories of the people she works with, but more importantly, how she's found to make development sustainable and not reliant just on people swooping in and then swooping out. And I think that the story should tell a really poignant and meaningful, especially going into the Googler Gives time of the year. So with that, I'm going to let Kelsey tell her story, and then we're going to switch to a Q&A in a little bit. Kelsey.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Kelsey Finnegan, as James said. And I'm actually from the Bay Area. I'm from Dublin in the East Bay, but I live now in Kigali, Rwanda. So I'm here today because I want to tell you about my work the last 6 years in Ghana and Rwanda, but I also hope that I can give you some tangible examples of ways that you can be effective if you want to do something in the developing world. So I think it's important to point out that I didn't start out wanting to have this career. I never dreamed of living in Africa. And when I was studying at UCSB, I was studying communication, and Africa and international development could not have been further from my mind. I was removed and distant, and I assumed that while it was unfortunate, the circumstances and lives of people on the other side of the world weren't inextricably linked to mine. I was a student. I could barely pay my rent on time. I couldn't really take care of myself. So I assumed that that meant that I was powerless to help other people. I didn't realize how wrong I was until curiosity and free summer took me to a volunteer trip in Ghana. So I was placed to be an assistant teacher in a kindergarten class. And I, by the way, was not a trained teacher. Communication at UCSB doesn't really give you that. So I was given a class of 60 wild 5-year-old kids. And the teacher that I was supposed to be working with usually used my presence as a way to go get her hair or nails done. So for the most part, I was on my own. So I decided to focus on literacy, and we spent most of our time on the alphabet and numbers. So one day towards the end of my trip, I was assessing them to see how far they actually knew with their literacy. And I was testing them on letters of the alphabet. And I realized throughout the day that actually they had not understood a single thing that I taught them the entire time that I had been there. And that they had just tricked me into making it seem like they knew what I was teaching them. So I left that day, and then I left Ghana a few days later, and I was completely devastated. I knew that if I had actually known what I was doing, I would have been able to identify the problem and help them. But instead, I'd wasted their time, and even more so, I'd also wasted mine, because they were going to be moved up through a system. They were going to graduate to the next grade level, and I realized that they were going to consistently be in a system that could never teach them to read. And instead of actually being effective, I had wasted 2 months of their academic career. And I was really upset because it was very clear that they were 5 years old and the entire trajectory of their lives had already been decided. So I had so wanted to be effective, but instead my presence had probably left them in a worse state. And a lot of that was because I went in with my own agenda and assumptions of what I thought that they needed. So I went back to the States, but I found it really impossible to resume normal life. And I wanted to make it right, and even more so, I wanted to find a way to actually help the community in an effective and sustainable way. So I went back to Ghana on my own, and there I actually met a woman named Elizabeth. And so several years before, Elizabeth had started gathering street children under a tree and teaching them, and eventually her home had turned into a school and an orphanage. But I was surprised by the state that the kids were living in. They struggled to find food every day. They didn't have any infrastructure, didn't really have books or pencils. And a lot of people had passed through this place, which was called Happy Kids Orphanage. A lot of local and international people, but all of them had felt too overwhelmed to actually help Elizabeth improve it. So we started working together and we decided to work piece by piece. So the children didn't have a place to sleep at Happy Kids. So that was our first goal. And I didn't know how to fundraise, but I decided to take a chance and sent out an email to family and friends. And that ended up getting us the money that we needed to build the dormitory. And I went back a few months later and we built it. And so once we had the dormitory, we obviously realized that they needed more infrastructure, they needed more ways to actually sustain the facility themselves. And so we registered Happy Kids Foundation as an NGO, and we continued to work together, and we built a school, classroom by classroom. I started to realize that as we were building this infrastructure that they needed something to sustain the added cost of having that infrastructure. So from that point on, every time we built something, we implemented an income generating project or an empowering project that would help the facility sustain itself. A livestock program, a sewing program, where the kids not only learn skills that can help them support themselves after they leave us, but it helps us to also raise some small money in the village. We opened the first internet cafe in the village. We also do things that aren't income generating, but are important. So this is Hannah when she saw the ocean for the first time a few years ago. So I know that it would be really easy to say that I did all of this, and that all of this progress could be attributed to my being there. But that would be giving you an incomplete story. It's actually because of this person and because of an amazing team of people that we have in Ghana. I'm a part of it, that's very true, but it's important to remember that all I did was build an idea off of Elizabeth's already existing dream. And that's something that I learned that was really important, which was that in order for development to be effective, it has to be locally driven. So if you want to make an impact, the best way to do it is to find someone who's doing what you want to do and supporting them. As my work and experience evolved, I became really interested in post-conflict development, and I ended up getting an opportunity to work in Rwanda with survivors of the Rwandan genocide. Rwanda, by the way, is one of the most beautiful places you will ever see. But it's not known for that, it's more known for its history, which I hope most of you know. In 1994, the genocide resulted in an estimated 800,000 to 1 million people being killed in just 100 days. And Rwanda's famous not only for the fact that all of these horrific things happened, but also for the conscious decision of the international community not to stop it. At Survivors Fund, we work with local survivors organizations, and we work through those local organizations to support survivors to access justice, to gain skills that can help them start small businesses, for education, and for counseling, among many other things. This is a counseling group that we have. This is an income-generating group meeting to go over their accounting books. So, being in Rwanda, I've had the privilege of working with really incredible people. And these people are those who have managed to survive not only against the odds, but they also are committed to not being defined or limited by what happened in 1994. So they consistently stand up to improve themselves and to improve their communities, despite the fact that a lot of them are still struggling with the consequences of genocide. So one of those women is Jose. In 1994, Jose was living with her husband and 3 children. And when the genocide started and the extremists launched the campaign to exterminate the Tutsis and moderate Hutu, her family was targeted. So her husband and her son were immediately killed, but she managed to escape with her children and her sister. And they found refuge in a family friend's home. So while they thought that they were in a place that was protecting them, it turned out the man that was protecting them raped Jose and her sister. So they fled again. And despite the odds and despite consistently being targeted, Jose managed to survive. And unfortunately, soon after, her sister realized that she was pregnant with the child of the rapist. And these children in Rwanda are typically referred to as children of bad memories. So because her sister was so traumatized, she was unable to take care of the baby, so Jose adopted her. And she felt that she was really sick, but she didn't really know why. And several years passed, and then in 1996, Survivors Fund partnered with another women's association to launch a project that gave free HIV testing. And it was then that Jose realized that she was HIV positive. So she wasn't able to access medication because it was really expensive at that time, and she was unable to work or really do much of anything for 10 years. But eventually she got access to treatment and became able to work. So a lot of what we do at Survivors Fund is providing income generating skills because a huge number of survivors are still living in extreme poverty. So we provide training so that these people can start their own small micro businesses. And Jose participated in one of those trainings in 2012. And then she received a loan to start a business. She had prepared this great business plan. It seemed like everything was going to plan. And then we gave her the money. And the moment we left, she turned to her son and she said, "Come, let's spend this money before the killers come back for us." This was 18 years after the genocide. So you can imagine how deeply embedded that type of trauma is. And that is what trauma in Rwanda still is today. It's still very much there. So once Survivors Fund learned about this, we invited Jose to be a part of a counseling group that we run for women with children born from rape. And she went through the program, and she developed another business plan. And when she finished, we gave her a second chance, and she got a loan, and that time she used it for a business. First it was chickens. She's the true entrepreneur. It was chickens, then it was goats, and then it moved into basket weaving. So now Jose runs several businesses, and she also goes around the village and teaches others income-generating skills like basket weaving. Jose is a really good example because Rwanda's made a lot of progress since 1994, and that can't be understated. The government has put in place so many incredible policies to try and rebuild the country. But there's also still a lot of challenges that survivors specifically are struggling with. And Jose is also an example of how the potential that individuals have to create solutions to their own poverty, if only they're given the opportunity. So I realize that we can at times feel overwhelmed by the breadth of catastrophes happening today, and maybe it's hard for you to decide how or where to lend your support. But we can't shy away from harsh realities because it's only in recognizing them that we can actually do something about it. And I think we're so often paralyzed by the idea that we as individuals are too small or inconsequential to actually affect any sort of real change. And I want to end my presentation by telling you that that assumption is wrong. And if my story demonstrates anything, it's that none of us are powerless to do something, regardless of the scale of the problem. And you should choose something that you believe in, work to understand it, and then find someone locally who's working to address it and support them. And lastly, we have to be optimistic, both about the state of the world and our existence in it. So these are the two organizations that I work with, if anyone is interested in learning more information.
So it's been over 20 years, I think it's almost 21 now, since the genocide in Rwanda, yet for many Rwandans, the effects continue to haunt. And you spoke about this with a really poignant example. What have you learned about the long-term impact of horrific events like this from your work supporting survivors?
Yeah, so I think that that's one of the most confusing and maybe sometimes surprising things for people to realize is that Rwanda is, by all definition, a success story and has really come a long way from 1994, but that it takes a lot longer than 21 years to actually recover from genocide. And the consequences that survivors are feeling continue to change and in some cases evolve. Like in the immediate aftermath of the genocide, the priorities were very different. A lot of that was on infrastructure. Actually finding a place to bury bodies was a huge problem. HIV/AIDS, counseling, establishing a secure police force so that it secured the country. And now the challenges are in some cases the same, like José's story in terms of trauma still being very present in there, but also being very different. For example, women that had children that were born from rape, who are now growing up into adulthood, face issues with identity and who they are. The projects that I work with support young survivors who were children during the genocide and have grown up, for the most part, without social support or family. And they graduate from school but find that they're unable to find any sort of job or access finance that would help them start a small business. There's a lot of legal issues related to the genocide, and specifically with youth who had, their parents had land during the genocide, and then they've now grown up and realized that they rightfully should have land that belonged to their families, and that's a huge asset in Rwanda because it's a very overpopulated country. So they need legal support to fight those battles and to actually get their land back. And we run a legal and counseling helpline program that tries to support people to do that. So yeah, there's obviously, like I said, extreme poverty is still an issue. The opportunities for work are still very limited in Rwanda. So it's, the challenges are very multifaceted, and they also continue to evolve as time goes on, which is why we think and believe that it needs a targeted approach.
So I want to switch gears back to Happy Kids, and I think you've told me some stories over the years about introducing the internet and computers to kids for the first time, and what have you learned about the impact of access to the internet and technology, both positively and potentially negatively?
Yeah, so we opened the first internet cafe in the village, which was really interesting to see. From an organizational perspective, it was huge for us in terms of being able to communicate with the outside world, being able to advocate for what we were doing, learn lessons from other organizations. It was huge in that sense. What I think was probably more huge was the impact it had on the kids themselves. Just in general, I was shocked by how quickly they picked up on the technology. They fix my computer now when there's a problem, which is pretty impressive because they've had almost no training in it. But it's also, kind of enabled them to, see outside of the village and see really the possibilities that they could have despite being where they are. Like one example is when we first started it, and I had all of these really idealistic dreams about only using the internet as an educational resource. And they were begging me, Kelsey, we've seen Facebook. We really want Facebook. I said, you are too young. They were like 14 at the time. I said, this is going to be an educational resource. So I left the internet cafe, and like 20 minutes later, I had 10 friend requests. So I lost that battle. And for example, our kids are also growing up, and I was there a few weeks ago, and you have situations where teenage boys are using the internet that teenage boys use the internet for. And that's been a really awkward, hilarious thing to witness. But that's what's so cool, is it kind of enabled them to be normal kids, which was a really incredible thing to watch.
Cool. At Happy Kids Now, you provide donors the option of sponsoring a child, and there are numerous programs that do this. Describe how that works at Happy Kids and what you've learned, at least in your own experience, about making that an effective giving option.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I actually shied away from the sponsorship program because I really wanted to emphasize on that local solution and finding the way to build up resources locally. But raising that many kids, which we have 40, is always going to be really expensive. So we introduced sponsorship as a way to make sure that we can secure basic needs for every kid. So typically the person will either choose the child. We have their profiles on our website, so they can choose the child or we can choose them for them. And then with us, because we're a small organization, we really do connect that individual to that child. That doesn't always happen with sponsorship programs. But with us, we really wanted it to be mutually beneficial, both for the kid themselves and also for the person that chooses to sponsor them. So when they link up, normally the sponsor will write a letter, and then when we can, the kids will write back, which has been hilarious because we really just hand them a piece of paper and tell them to write. And so we have really great letters that they write about their lives, and then we have others that are written by 6-year-olds that are like, "Dear Jonathan, I love flowers," and that's it. So that's been really entertaining, but it's also, I was surprised by how much it ended up meaning to the kids personally, how much they actually value having a sponsor. And I can only speak for our program because we really make that effort to make them understand where the support is coming from. I think in general with sponsorship programs, the support doesn't just go to that child, and ours is the same. It supports that child, but it also helps us just run the organization and try to, improve on what we're doing. So I think anytime that you want to be involved in sponsorship, you should also be connected to what the organization's mission is, because either way your support is going to affect both.
CNN's Anderson Cooper has spoken of telling stories of people who would otherwise be invisible and forgotten, and he had a great quote that I couldn't track down during the tsunami that affected Indonesia, where there are people that just existed that didn't exist and would have been completely wiped off the history of the earth. So what have you learned from the individual people and their stories in your years in Ghana and Rwanda that you'll take with you for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think it's really important to tell those individual stories because that's what makes it relatable. I think we can so often get bogged down by the kind of broader numbers and all these catastrophes that we can't really relate to. And telling an individual story kind of humanizes problems or successes. And so I realized that it was really crucial to tell those stories in order to help people connect with things that are maybe very far away and foreign to them. When I went to see Jose a few weeks ago and asked her if she was okay with me telling her story today, she was very calm and she said, "Please, go and tell them." And I think with that, it's a very good example of how a lot of people in Rwanda, as difficult as it is to tell their story, they want it to be shared because they're so desperate to have people realize what happened and also realize the mistake that all of us made and why it shouldn't happen again. I think it's also important to say, though, that you're not only sharing stories of doom and despair, and I try to do that a lot. I try to not always show pictures of, sad people because that's not, how Africa is defined. And genocide certainly isn't all that Rwanda is defined as. And so it's also important to share positive stories and to, make sure that it doesn't create a negative image when it's not the full story.
Mm-hmm. So just one more question before I open up the audience is, for most people, the ability to help and support those outside their communities is limited to donations. What have you learned working for charitable organizations that can help individuals channel their donations in the most effective and impactful way possible?
That's what I'm hoping that you could take away from this, is that you realize that you don't have to go to Africa or volunteer in Africa to make some sort of impact. Actually, for most of you, it's probably better that you support from here. You can actually make more of an impact from here. And a lot of that is through supporting a local people or local organizations, which is what we do at Survivors Fund. It's what we do at Happy Kids, building up the capacity of local people, which really makes sure that the projects are being determined by the people who actually need them and not by the donors themselves. I think it's also really important to be flexible and open, because sometimes the causes or projects that could benefit from your support the most are maybe not so attractive. And so, I mean, if you find an organization or an individual that you think is really doing good, giving them the flexibility to use your money as they see best fit will make your money go much further.
It's so interesting, like you make a differentiation about, like if you want to make an impact, find somebody who's doing what you are interested in and support them. And I feel like that's an important shift that, I don't know, do you see that taking place in the developing world right now, where we're starting to support local organizations? Because I feel like what was happening before is like we'd show up with our ideas and like our suggestions and our money, and we try to fix things for people, and that wasn't working. And when you talked about going to the school and how you kind of spent 2 months and that didn't work, I just wonder if that shift is happening, or if you still see people showing up and trying to fix things on their own.
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think that development itself is really advancing, and those kind of, I think a lot of people have this idea of what development used to be, and that can sometimes be ineffective. I think the way it's going is definitely on building local institutions and having local partners. I mean, it is worth saying though that that's really difficult, because it takes time to build capacity of organizations and to make sure that they also play a part in the design of a project. So I mean, I think in a lot of ways, most of at least in the work, and I would say in Ghana it happens more often that people just kind of jump in, at least in the village, and some people who maybe have development as a hobby. But it is a very professional sector, and I think it's, of course, better to support experts that are on the ground, that are working with local people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you only support local institutions, but make sure that whatever organization you're supporting is working with a local institution, and trying to make the work more sustainable that way. So I guess, I think it's kind of both. I do think we're going in that direction, but it's definitely the more difficult way to do it. So it's a slow progression, I think. Yeah.
All right, I want to thank Kelsey and everyone on the live stream for however many there are. I always have no idea who's out there. And everyone that's going to see this later on YouTube. So thank you very much, Kelsey, for sharing your story and the story of those you work with, and appreciate and found it very moving. Thank you.
Thank you.